Now that we have discussed the concepts of culture and identity, let's think about some ways in which people might actually influence the culture and identity of others. First, let's talk about cultural diffusion. The diffusion of culture happens when cultural practices spread from one location to another in a way that such practices are embraced by others easily and voluntarily. Foreign ideas, beliefs, and practices are often found appealing by those living outside that culture, and therefore adopt or embrace those aspects of the other culture as their own. The diffusion of products from one part of the world to another, for example, ultimately affects cultural preferences. Tea imported from India to Britain quickly became a preferred beverage in the United Kingdom. The same can be said about Coca-Cola being exported around the world and becoming a much consumed beverage that is reflective of American culture. Beyond cultural diffusion, we see that one culture might influence another through cultural assimilation. Assimilation involves the submergence of cultural differences into a broader, more dominant culture. A student from China, for example, may move to the United States for college and adopt a more American name in order to assimilate into his or her American life. In fact, anyone migrating to another part of the world may likely assimilate most quickly if he or she learns the local language and begins to abide by local customs and practices. Finally, one culture might influence another through cultural imperialism. This occurs when a more dominant culture forces a smaller culture to change its cultural practices, not necessarily by using physical force, but by simply limiting the availability and visibility of cultural practices in the smaller society. One might argue that the global spread of American film, television shows, music, and even products like Coca-Cola is in some way imperialistic, and that this spread may limit and squeeze out local products and practices. With the constant presence of such foreign products and art forms, local cultures adjust out of necessity. Access to one's own religious practices, or the lack of such access, may be another way in which cultural imperialism is at work. Undoubtedly, globalization has had an impact on the spread of cultural ideas, beliefs, practices, and products. As discussed before in this class, ease of travel and global markets lead to the movement of all kinds of goods, services, people, and ideas. And this fact has had an effect on culture. Some say, for example, that the spread of culture from one place to another weakens cultural ties in any specific location, possibly making cultural practices less important and rather amorphous. Others suggest that the incorporation of cultural practices from one place to another leads to the uniformity of values and the homogenization of societies, which reduces the distinctiveness and unique nature of any particular culture. Finally, others suggest that the spread of cultural practices from one place to another leads to hybridization or the blending of cultural practices into something entirely new and different, replacing the previous cultural identity with a hybrid form of culture. But what do you think? Is the spread of culture from one place to another a given in today's global community? Does that spread result in a more homogeneous global culture? Or are we able to preserve specific cultural practices in local settings? Is culture something that should be preserved at all costs, or something that changes with the times? Tell us what you think.